It's one of the most famous crimes in American history. In fact, it's been called the crime that changed America.
I don't know who would do this to a 6-year-old child. I can't conceive of it.
Two fishermen on a canal in Vero Beach, Florida, thought they spotted a doll floating near the bank. They moved closer. It was not a doll. What they found that morning set off a chain of events that would force an entire country to confront something it had been ignoring for years. But to understand what they found and why it mattered, you need to go back 14 days, back to a Tuesday morning in Hollywood, Florida, back to a mother running errands, back to a little boy who had done nothing wrong except exist in a world that was not yet built to protect him. His name was Adam Walsh. He was 6 years old, and on the morning of July 27th, 1981, he walked into a shopping mall with his mother and never came back out. What happened inside that mall, what happened after, and what was uncovered over the next 27 years is one of the most devastating case studies in investigative failure this country has ever seen. Welcome to Crime Chronicles. Today we are covering the case of Adam Walsh. If you are new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you are watching from. Now let us get into it. John Walsh was not the kind of man who sat still. By the summer of 1981, he was the vice president and director of marketing at the Paradise Grand Hotel in Bal Harbour, Florida. He was overseeing a $26 million renovation project. He was sharp, driven, and by every measure, he was winning at the life he had built. His colleagues described him as someone who knew how to read a room, how to close a deal, and how to make things happen. But ask anyone who knew John Walsh in 1981 what mattered most to him, and the answer was never the hotel. It was his family. He and Reve had been together for years. She was studying interior design part-time, building something of her own while raising their son. People who knew them described their relationship the way you rarely hear people describe marriages, as a genuine partnership. John would later say she was his best friend. And at the center of everything they had built together was a boy named Adam. Adam John Walsh was born on November 14th, 1974. He was 6 years old in the summer of 1981. Sandy blonde hair, hazel eyes, dimples that showed up whether he was laughing or concentrating on something. He had a nickname, Otter, though exactly how it stuck depends on who you ask. What is not up for debate is the kind of child he was. He loved baseball. He loved drawing. He was described by everyone who knew him as warm, curious, and deeply attached to his parents. John Walsh would later say that if you could design the perfect son, Adam would be the result. That is not a grieving father reaching for words. That is what people who met Adam Walsh consistently said about him. He was due to start second grade that fall at St. Mark's Lutheran School in Hollywood. The school year was still weeks away. It was summer. And on the morning of July 27th, 1981, the Walsh household started like it always did. Adam was up early. He watched Sesame Street the way 6-year-olds do, completely absorbed, like nothing else in the world existed. John kissed him goodbye before heading to work at the hotel. It was a Tuesday. There was nothing about that morning that felt different from any other. After John left, Reve began organizing her day. She had a few things to take care of. First, she needed to drop off a $90 registration check at St. Mark's Lutheran School to secure Adam's place for the upcoming school year. Then she planned to stop at Sears in the Hollywood Mall. She had been watching a specific lamp advertisement for weeks, waiting for the sale price to come through. That morning it had. She had the advertisement clipping in her hand. 2 stops, 90 minutes at the most. Before she and Adam left, someone else came by the house. His name was James Campbell, though most people called him Jimmy. Campbell was Adam's godfather. He had lived with the Walsh family for 2 years before John asked him to move out. He and Reve had carried on a 4-year affair that John had eventually discovered. By July 1981, Campbell was no longer living there, but he still moved in and out of their lives. That morning, he stopped by the McKinley Street home at around 9:30. He shared a cup of tea with Reve. He sat with her and Adam on the sofa. Then he said he was heading to his job at the Golden Strand Hotel in Miami Beach and left. Reve and Adam got into their gray checker car shortly after. They drove first to St. Mark's, dropped off the check, and then made the short drive to the Hollywood Mall. It was a routine morning, the kind of morning that does not register in memory because there is no reason for it to. Nobody in that car had any reason to think this day would be anything other than ordinary. The Hollywood Mall was busy that Tuesday morning. Nothing unusual about that. It was summer, the middle of the week, and the kind of heat that pushes people indoors. Reve pulled into the parking lot with Adam just before noon. They entered the Sears store through the north entrance. Reve had one objective. The lamp she had been tracking for weeks was finally on sale, and she had the advertisement to prove it. The lighting section was not far. Adam was with her, but the walk through the store was the kind of walk that feels longer with a 6-year-old in tow, especially when there is something catching his eye every few feet. Near the toy section, there was an Atari 2600 gaming kiosk on display. A small group of older boys were gathered around it, taking turns. For a 6-year-old in the summer of 1981, that kiosk was the most interesting thing in the building. Reve made a decision that millions of parents make every single day. She let Adam stay at the kiosk while she walked a short distance to look at the lamp. He was in the store. She could be back in minutes. It was a reasonable call. She was gone for approximately 10 minutes. What happened in those 10 minutes would take investigators years to fully piece together. The boys at the kiosk ranged in age from 9 to 13. At some point, a dispute broke out over who was controlling the game. The noise drew the attention of store staff. A 17-year-old Sears employee named Kathy Schaefer was working nearby. She observed the group but was not in a position to intervene before the situation was already being handled. A security guard named James Martin was called over. This is where the first critical failure occurs. James Martin was not a trained security professional. He had no formal security credentials. There was no established Sears protocol for how to handle a group of unaccompanied minors causing a disturbance. Martin made a judgment call. He told the boys they needed to leave the store, all of them, and he directed them out through an exit on the east side of the building, an exit that Reve Walsh did not know existed, an exit on a completely different side of the mall from where she had come in. Adam was among the boys who were walked out. He was 6 years old. He was in an unfamiliar part of the parking lot. He did not know where his mother was. He did not know how to get back to the entrance they had used. Investigators would later note that Adam was described by people who knew him as a timid child, not the kind of boy who would have spoken up, pushed back, or demanded to be taken back inside to find his mother. He followed the older boys out, and when they went their separate ways, he was left alone. Outside, in the heat, in a section of the parking lot he had never seen before. Kathy Schaefer, for her part, was 17 years old and working a shift at a department store. The weight of what she witnessed that day, or more precisely, what she was not able to prevent, would stay with her for the next 27 years. She has spoken about it in interviews since the case was closed. She was not the decision maker that afternoon, but she was the last confirmed adult to see Adam Walsh alive inside that store. Reve returned to the kiosk within 10 minutes. Adam was not there. She checked the immediate area. She asked nearby staff if they had seen a little boy with sandy blonde hair. Nobody had a clear answer. She moved through the store, checking aisles, calling his name. Nothing. The store was busy enough that a missing child could go unnoticed for a few minutes, but those minutes were already adding up. Reve went to store staff and asked them to make an announcement over the public address system. The message went out across the Hollywood Mall. Adam Walsh, your mother is waiting for you. Please report to the toy department. The announcement ran. Then it ran again. Every 15 minutes, that same message echoed through the building. Adam never appeared. At that point, Reve was no longer looking for a boy who had wandered off. She knew something was wrong. She contacted the Hollywood Police Department. Officers responded to the scene, and this is where the second critical failure begins, because the responding officers treated the call as routine. A missing child in a shopping mall, in their experience, usually meant a kid who had wandered into another section of the store or was waiting by the wrong entrance. It happened regularly. Most of the time, the child turned up within the hour. They did not yet understand that Adam had already been outside that building for some time. What no one inside that mall knew, what no officer on the scene knew, was that by the time the PA announcement was running, Adam Walsh was likely already gone from that parking lot. The Hollywood Mall sat directly across the street from a Hollywood Police Department substation. Officers were close. Response time was not the issue. The issue was what happened in that window. The window between James Martin walking those boys out of an East Side exit and Reve Walsh returning to an empty kiosk. That window, investigators would later determine, was all the time that was needed, and nobody saw it closing. If you are watching this for the first time, subscribe to Crime Chronicles. We cover cases like this every single week with the depth and research they deserve. John Walsh was at work when the call came in. He left immediately. By the time he arrived at the Hollywood Mall, Reve had already been searching for Adam for what felt like an eternity. Officers were on the scene. The mall was still open. People were still shopping. And somewhere in the middle of all of that ordinary Tuesday afternoon activity, a 6-year-old boy was missing. John Walsh was not a man who panicked easily, but what he encountered when he arrived was not a coordinated search. It was not a lockdown building. It was not a department store with staff actively working to locate a missing child. What he found was a situation being treated as routine. And from the moment he understood that, something shifted in him that would never fully shift back. The Hollywood Police Department had a substation directly across the street from that mall. Response time was not the problem. The problem was what happened after they responded. In 1981, there was no national database for missing children. There was no centralized system that law enforcement could access to flag a missing child across county or state lines. There was no Amber Alert. There was no coordinated protocol between local police departments for situations exactly like this one. If a child went missing in Hollywood, Florida, the Hollywood Police Department handled it. And how they handled it depended entirely on the individual officers on the scene and the decisions made by whoever was assigned to lead the investigation. The officers who responded to the mall that afternoon made an assessment. In their experience, children reported missing in shopping malls almost always turned up quickly. They had wandered into another section of the store. They were waiting at the wrong entrance. They had followed another family out to the parking lot and were sitting on a curb somewhere nearby. The assumption, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, was that this would resolve itself. It did not resolve itself. As the hours passed and Adam did not appear, the Walsh family began to understand the full weight of what they were dealing with. John started making calls. He contacted anyone he could think of who might be able to help accelerate the search. He reached out to the FBI. The FBI told him they could not intervene. Under the laws that existed in 1981, the FBI had no jurisdiction in a missing child case unless there was clear evidence that the child had been taken across state lines. Without that evidence, it was a local matter. John Walsh was standing in a police department asking for federal resources to find his 6-year-old son, and the answer he received was that the law did not allow for it. It would take a full week before the FBI became involved in Adam's case. 7 days. In a missing child investigation, 7 days is not a delay. It is a collapse. The lead investigators assigned to the case were detectives Jack Hoffman and Ron Hickman of the Hollywood Police Department. They took over the investigation in the early hours of the search, and from the beginning, the direction they took it would define not just the outcome of this case, but the reputation of their entire department for decades to come. Standard investigative practice at the time, and this is confirmed by law enforcement experts, was to begin with the people closest to the victim, family members, friends, anyone who knew the child's routine and had access to information about where the family would be on any given day. That approach is logical. It is still used today, and in the early hours of any investigation, it makes sense to establish where everyone was and eliminate people systematically. The problem was not that Hoffman and Hickman followed that approach. The problem was how long they stayed with it and who they stayed focused on. John and Reve Walsh were both asked to take lie detector tests. They agreed without hesitation. Both of them passed. That should have moved the investigation forward. Instead, the focus shifted to James Campbell, Adam's godfather, the man who had been at the Walsh home that same morning, the man who had carried on a 4-year affair with Reve. Campbell had motive, at least on paper. He had access to information about the family's schedule. He had been at the house just hours before Adam disappeared. Detectives Hoffman and Hickman went back to him repeatedly. On November 25, 1981, nearly 4 months after Adam vanished, they confronted Campbell directly. They told him that no one could confirm his whereabouts between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon on the day Adam disappeared. Campbell told them he had stayed in his cabana at the Golden Strand Hotel because it was too windy to rent boats. He had no witness to confirm that, but he agreed to take a polygraph examination. Detective Joe Matthews, a polygraph expert with the Hollywood Police Department, administered the test. His conclusion was unambiguous. Campbell had responded truthfully across every relevant question. Campbell was given a second polygraph. He passed that one too. Hollywood Police Chief Richard Witt later stated publicly that it was a physical impossibility for Campbell to have committed this crime. Campbell had been confirmed in the Hollywood area that afternoon. The distance between Hollywood and where Adam was eventually found was more than 120 miles. The timeline did not work. It could not work. But the investigation had already lost months chasing a direction that the evidence did not support. Meanwhile, John and Reve Walsh were living inside a nightmare that had no endpoint. Every morning they woke up not knowing where their son was. Every night they went through the same calls, the same dead ends, the same silence. John drove to motels. He checked in with hospitals. He called Adam's friends. He contacted anyone who might have seen something. He and Reve spent the early days of that search doing the work that they believed the investigation should have been doing faster and more aggressively. The national media was not yet paying attention. The case had received some local coverage, but it had not broken through to a national audience. There was no mechanism in 1981 to rapidly elevate a missing child case to the level of public awareness that might have generated leads from across the state. Everything was slower, everything was more contained, and every day that passed made the situation more difficult to resolve. 14 days after Adam Walsh walked into that Sears store and never came back out, the investigation that had been searching for him got its answer. Not through detective work, not through a tip that came in through official channels, through 2 fishermen on a canal in Vero Beach who thought they had spotted a doll. When the remains were confirmed as Adam Walsh, the investigation changed character completely. What had been a missing child case was now a homicide investigation. And with that shift came a new level of pressure. On the Hollywood Police Department, on the detectives assigned to the case, and on a family that was now grieving while simultaneously demanding answers from a department that had already lost 2 weeks. The search for whoever was responsible would stretch across years. It would pull in multiple suspects. The first person to come under serious scrutiny was someone already familiar to the investigation, James Campbell. Campbell had been examined in the early days of the search, before Adam's fate was known. But now, with the case reclassified, detectives Hoffman and Hickman returned to him with renewed focus. On November 25, 1981, detectives sat down with Campbell again. They told him directly that no one could place him anywhere between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon on July 27th. Campbell maintained his account. He had been at the Golden Strand Hotel where he worked. It was too windy to rent boats that day, so he had stayed in his cabana. He had no witness to confirm it, but he did not waver. Detective Joe Matthews administered a polygraph examination. Matthews was experienced. His conclusion was that Campbell had answered every relevant question truthfully. A second polygraph was conducted. Campbell passed that one as well. Hollywood Police Chief Richard Witt reviewed the findings and made a public statement. He said it was a physical impossibility that Campbell had committed this crime. Campbell was eliminated, but the investigation did not slow down. It shifted. The next significant lead came from an unexpected direction. A man named Edward James had previously been arrested in Florida for abducting a young boy. That prior offense alone made him someone investigators needed to look at closely. But what moved him from a name on a list to an active suspect was something far more specific. James had reportedly told a cellmate that he had abducted and killed Adam Walsh. He allegedly told this person that he was not worried about investigators finding anything in his car, a 1973 Plymouth Fury, because he was confident there was no evidence to find. That is a specific claim, specific enough that investigators took it seriously. When detectives looked further into James, they found details that added weight to the lead. Records showed he had been absent from his apartment complex for 2 consecutive weeks in 1981, a period that overlapped with the time frame of Adam's disappearance. And on August 27, 1981, exactly 1 month after Adam went missing, James had a seat cover installed by an upholstery shop. Replacing interior covering in a vehicle shortly after a serious crime is the kind of detail that investigators do not overlook. Detectives brought James in for a formal interview. The investigation into Edward James was formally discontinued, another dead end. Then in 1995, a third name entered the picture, and this one came from outside the department. Michael Monahan was not a stranger to the case file. He was Campbell's roommate at the time of Adam's abduction. But on June 29, 1995, Hollywood Police Chief Richard Witt wrote directly to the Miami Herald and stated that Michael Monahan had been eliminated as a suspect. 3 suspects, 3 formal investigations, 3 eliminations. And then came a fourth, one that arrived from a direction nobody inside the Hollywood Police Department had anticipated. In July of 1991, 10 years after Adam Walsh disappeared, a man named Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. What investigators found in his apartment shocked the country. Dahmer had been responsible for the deaths of 17 people. He was one of the most extensively documented serial offenders in American criminal history. Forensic psychologist Rod Hovet, who analyzed Dahmer's profile in depth, explained the reasoning clearly. Serial offenders develop patterns. They have age ranges. They have specific characteristics they look for. The idea that someone who had established a consistent pattern with older victims would suddenly and completely deviate to target a 6-year-old child did not align with what behavioral science understood about how these individuals operate. The lead was formally closed. 4 suspects, 4 formal investigations, 4 eliminations. And through all of it, through every interview, every polygraph, every trip across state lines, every review of evidence, the answer had been sitting in the Hollywood Police Department's own case file since October of 1983. A confession, not a rumor, not a tip passed through an unreliable source. A direct, detailed, on-record confession from a man who claimed to know exactly what happened to Adam Walsh, exactly where it happened, and exactly how. The department had it documented, they had it recorded, and for reasons that would later become one of the most heavily scrutinized aspects of this entire case, they had not made it the undeniable center of their investigation. That man's name was Ottis Toole, and to understand what he confessed to, and why it took so long for anyone in a position of authority to take it seriously enough, you first need to understand who Ottis Toole actually was.
Toole made 24 documented confessions to killing Adam Walsh, including during this 1984 interview with the Texas Rangers.
Have you ever wished you hadn't killed someone?
Why can't he feel bad about that Adam Walsh kid?
That's the only person you've ever killed that you feel bad about?
That's the youngest child I ever killed. He's only 6 years old.
Ottis Elwood Toole was born on March 5, 1947, in Jacksonville, Florida. The world he was born into was not a stable one. His family lived in deep poverty. His household was described by those who later examined his background as severely dysfunctional, the kind of environment where a child learns early that the adults around them cannot be relied upon for consistency, safety, or guidance. His father abandoned the family when Ottis was young. What remained was a home life that investigators and forensic psychologists would later describe as one of the most damaging early environments they had encountered in the context of a criminal background review. When detectives returned from Jacksonville in October 1983, Ottis Toole had given them a detailed confession containing non-public details about the vehicle, the route, the location, and what Adam was wearing. Information that a person with no direct knowledge of the crime could not have reliably produced. Investigators found items at Toole's home consistent with what Adam had on that day, impounded his Cadillac, and conducted luminol testing on the interior with results significant enough to photograph. Then the department lost the carpeting, sold the car for scrap, and rendered the only remaining physical evidence untestable, what John Walsh publicly called negligence. Toole confessed and recanted approximately 24 times over the years, but in 1984 made an unprompted on-camera statement to Texas Rangers referencing Adam as the youngest person he had ever harmed. And in 1991, an independent witness came forward describing a specific vehicle dent that had never been released to the public. In 1997, incoming Chief Rick Stone reviewed the entire case file and concluded the evidence pointed to Toole beyond a reasonable doubt. But Toole had died in Florida State Prison the previous year, and a dead man cannot be charged. In 2006, Reve told John she was not going to her grave without an answer. They hired retired Miami Beach homicide detective Joe Matthews, who spent 2 years going through all 10,000 pages of the case file and discovered 98 photographs of Toole's Cadillac that the original detectives had never fully examined. One image showed a blood transfer on the rear floorboard consistent with a human face. Matthews concluded that lead detective Jack Hoffman had allowed ego and tunnel vision to override the evidence in front of him. That 2-year independent reinvestigation became the foundation on which Hollywood Police Chief Chad Wagner officially closed the Adam Walsh case on December 16, 2008. John Walsh was a hotel executive before July 27, 1981. After that date, he became something the country had never quite seen before, a private citizen who turned personal loss into national policy. Within 1 year of Adam's disappearance, he and Reve stood with federal lawmakers and pushed through the Missing Children's Act of 1982, which for the first time in American history mandated the FBI to maintain records on missing children nationally. Before that law existed, a child could vanish, and the systems meant to find them had no reliable way to share what they knew across state lines. In 1984, they founded what became the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization that has since assisted in the recovery of more than 426,000 children. In 1988, John became the host of America's Most Wanted, which ran for 25 years and helped capture over 1,200 fugitives. In 2006, President George W. Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act on the South Lawn of the White House, establishing a national sex offender registry and increasing federal penalties for crimes against children. John was later appointed a United States Marshal, and in every retail store across America today, when a child goes missing on the premises, Staff lock down the exits and make an announcement. That protocol is called a Code Adam. It is named after a 6-year-old boy who was walked out of a Sears store through an exit his mother did not know existed. Because there was no protocol in place to prevent it, there is one now. Adam. John Walsh was born on November 14, 1974. Sandy blonde hair, hazel eyes. He loved baseball. He loved drawing. He did not get to walk into that second-grade classroom his mother had paid the registration for on the morning everything changed. But because of him, and because of what his parents refused to let his death become, hundreds of thousands of children came home to theirs. If this case stayed with you, subscribe to Crime Chronicles. Every week we go deep on cases that change the world and the people who live through them. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss an upload. We will see you in the next one.